Leadership to me is competence and character.
What does love have to do with anything in the workplace?
Leadership is where you inspire people to go above and beyond. That's when you have not only the heads but also the hearts.
Do you still change your mindset and focus on what you can control?
My choice is to make a decision to go elsewhere.
What motivates you still to do better?
I like to think of myself as a work in progress.
So how do you lead with heart?
You give them the freedom. You trust them. You empower them. You care for the whole person, not the person that shows up at work. You care for the individual in totality.
My guest today is Niren Chaudhary, the CEO at Panera Brands, which is the parent company behind Panera Bread, Einstein Bagels, and Caribou Coffee. Niren is responsible for leading over 100,000 team members across all three of these brands. Today's discussion is one that I honestly think will truly change your life, both personally and professionally. It's a combination of business advice, combination of philosophy, career strategy, and just a general approach to living a better life. During our discussion, Niren shares the tragic story of his daughters and what he learned from them, why you should never see yourself as a victim, what the ultimate measure of leadership success is, and how one of my previous guests, David Novak, the former CEO of Yum Brands, changed Niren's life and approach to leadership. I guess it probably makes sense to start off with just what was your career path and trajectory like to become the CEO of Panera Bread? And for people who are not familiar with Panera Bread, maybe you can give a little background information about the company and how many employees do you guys have? What do you do?
Sure. It's great to be on the show and have the opportunity to have a chat with you. So I look after Panera Brands, which has got three brands underneath Panera Bread, Caribou Coffee, and Einstein Bagels. And that's a total of close to 4,000 stores across 11 countries, employing about 130,000 people.
Wow.
Three fantastic brands, and I just love being in the food business, and having the opportunity to lead these brands in particular has been probably easily the best job of my life. So it started way back, I grew up in India and I worked in hotels initially, always drawn to the service industry and people and, people-focused businesses. I always found that fascinating. And then I joined Yum Brands, which you may know, which is Pizza Hut, KFC, Taco Bell.
Did you work with David Novak?
I did. He's like my mentor and my best buddy.
Oh, he's been on the show before. He's one of the CEOs I've interviewed for my book. Yeah, David's great.
Yeah, I love David. He's probably had the biggest impact on me of any leader I've worked with. So
interesting. Okay, I'm gonna have to touch on that too. I'm very curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I love the guy. So I started with Yum Brands in India and then worked with Yum for almost 25 years.
Wow.
Fantastic career, lots of different opportunities. So I ran and lived in Europe. I lived in Holland. I speak a bit of Dutch. Then went to Germany, speak a bit of German as well. Then went to the UK. So 10 odd years in Europe, 10 years of running these brands in India, from as startup opportunities. All three brands, I introduced them in India. And then I became the global president for KFC. That was my last job with Yum. And then I joined my current employer, which is JAB Holding, an investment fund that own a bunch of very exciting food retail concepts like the Panera Brands that I mentioned, but also Krispy Kreme, that you may know, and Peet's Coffee, etc. So I joined them about 7 odd years back, and have been with them ever since. My first job was Krispy Kreme. So I was the international president, COO, peddling donuts all over the world.
Tough job getting free donuts.
Packing these donuts in my briefcase and flying all over the world. A fabulous brand, great job. And then I came on about, 4 years back to Panera Bread in 2019 to transform the company. Fascinating assignment. I was taking over from a very successful founder, and my fund had just acquired the business. So I came in then, and here we are. 4 years later, exciting journey it has been for sure.
Let's talk a little bit about David now that you mention him. One of the things that I'm really interested in always, and I have had a couple people. I've had Artie Stars.
Yeah, I know Artie.
Okay, yeah.
I
So
know
I think
Artie as well.
he's at
Yeah.
Topgolf now. He also talked about David Novak and the current CEO of Yum, David Gibbs. David Gibbs, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny because quite a few people have talked about the impact that David Novak has had on their lives, and you've mentioned that he's been a great leader for you and a mentor to you. What did David do that had such an impact on you as a leader?
I'll tell you, David, there was, of course, the business side of David, and his business philosophy of get the people capability right first, get the culture right, and results will follow. That was a core philosophy that he had. And part of the culture being catching people doing things right, the recognition aspect of it, which I embraced. But it is not that. The reason why I absolutely love David is because of his humanity. And I think leaders who inspire me, interestingly, are those who are, of course, they are smart and they know how to get things done, but I get really inspired by the human emotion, compassion, and care. And when that shows up in a leader, I get very drawn to it, and I've learned from it, and I try and sort of pay that forward. So I'll share with you a story. I lost my 18-year-old daughter, Aisha, in 2015. And, it obviously crushed me. And the day after she passed away, the doorbell rings. I open the door, and David Novak is standing on my doorstep, having taken 3 commercial flights, because he couldn't take his normal sort of private jet. 3 commercial flights, came in, we both hugged, we both wept. And then he turned around and he left and took those 3 flights and went back home. And he just came to just show me that he cared for me.
Wow.
And, and this is one of the many examples of just, human empathy and care that he demonstrated, not only with me, by the way, but so many hundreds of other people across the company, that then makes you feel that you want to do anything for this individual, And that's, I think, how you inspire people, is by connecting with them as a human, by having that bond of empathy and compassion. And that's how you inspire people to go beyond what you may want them to do. And that certainly was David for me.
He actually I never knew that story. So he flew, and I'm assuming he what did he stay for a few days with you?
Overnight, he just came in, he hugged me, he spent the night, and then he was back on the plane and he was gone.
Wow. Yeah, you don't hear stories like that from leaders. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because he was obviously a very competent leader. And maybe for people who don't know Yum Brands, I think when David was the CEO, what was it, like 1.5 million employees? It was one of the world's largest companies.
Yeah.
With brands, with KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell. So this was absolutely massive organization, one of the world's largest. And the fact that he did that, I think, speaks volumes to David's character. And obviously he was a very competent business leader. He was very good at what he did. But it seemed like for other leaders like you, and for those who worked with David, what really stood out wasn't just his business acumen, but his being able to connect with people, which is what made you want to go above and beyond to do things for David.
Exactly.
And that's a very, very powerful thing, because I think especially in leadership, competence is important, but we spend maybe too much emphasis only focusing on competence and forgetting about the need to connect with people.
Yeah, I so agree with you, because I think leadership to me is competence and character.
Yeah.
And I would argue that character perhaps is even more important in today's world than competence. I think competence you can get, but character, which is, to me, character is basically a collection of your habits. And if you have clarity of values, you have consistency in how you show up. And if you have consistency, that's how you build trust. And if you build trust, then you can, unlock human potential. So I totally agree with you. I think we, and as leaders today, we spend a lot of time developing our competency, and how competent we are.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we spend enough time nurturing what defines our character, which in turn is shaped by experiences, shaped by our community, by people around us, the kind of friends that we have, the things that we read, listen to, and all these things, combined shape us. And if we can do that in a very conscious way, I think we can actually embrace a mindset and beliefs that are more powerful, that define who we are, and we show up as that consistently. And through that build trust and unlock the potential of others.
And I think that's the sign of a great leader, is not what they do for the business, but what they do for people who work at that business, who then go on to other things. And it sounds like in your case, you took a lot of those lessons from David of connecting with people, of being human, and now you brought this into another organization with 130,000 people. So you've applied, I guess, you brought that same philosophy from David into this other organization.
Yeah, I have this. You're absolutely right. I have always believed in, and David showed me why it was important, and I've seen the evidence of it, that the power of a people-first culture and a people-first business philosophy. So my business philosophy is very simple. My job, indeed, job of the leaders in my company, is to love our people. If we love our people, love our people, not just take care of our people, love our people. And if we love our people, then they will delight our guests. And if they delight our guests, we will also, serve our communities. And if we do that, that's how we'll create enterprise value. So I think it's kind of into-out process. And I think I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we create an environment and a culture and a leadership style where people truly feel that they are loved and cared for. In a holistic way. So that's my business philosophy. I think that's what we practice at our brands at Panera. And, that's what we show up to do every single day.
It's funny, you don't really hear many leaders say that we should love our people. Some people listening and watching this might say, it's not a leader's job to love their people. It's a leader's job to get their people to do their job and to perform well and to unlock their potential. What does love have to do with anything in the workplace? And how
it reminds me of that song, "What's Love Got to Do?"
Exactly. So why have that message? Why love?
I'll tell you why. I think all of us as leaders go through 3 stages of a leadership passage. One is individual contributor, where we do things ourselves. Then we're a manager of people, where we tell people what to do. And normally that's where people stop, is like, my job as a manager, they're calling it being a leader, but I'd say you're being a manager when you're telling people what to do, and you don't need to do anything beyond that. And as long as you're efficient and you can delegate effectively and you can empower them, they will get it done. And do you need to do anything more? And my argument is, yes, you can, and you must do more. And that more is actually leadership. And that leadership is where you inspire people to go above and beyond what you want to get done. But the magic is when they do it because they want to do it, not because you're asking them to do it. And that inspiration comes only through, I believe, when people feel, loved, cared for, respected, have a sense of autonomy, have a sense that this aligns with who I am as a human and what I want to see happen. And, I'm happy at work and I enjoy myself. And it's not just a paycheck. It's more than that. That's when you have, not only the heads, but also the hearts. Here's the other thing. I think you'll agree with me that any company sets out to create enterprise value and which is understandable. Now, enterprise value, it's very important, and it's a output of a great strategy that is well executed. And strategy is kind of how do we win? What's the point of difference? How do we sustain that competitive advantage, etc.? But I would argue that strategy is good, but execution is everything. Because strategy, if you look at the components of strategy, I think most companies have very similar strategies, but the difference is how you execute it. And execution, to me, is a function of heart, not the head. It's kind of how badly do I want it?
Yeah.
What is my level of intentionality and commitment? And can I fire up all these 130,000 people to want to come every single day and be the very best version of who they can be, consistently being better than they were a day before? That to me is more than just, being managed.
Yeah.
It's kind of being inspired to be the very best that you can be. And in doing so, make yourself successful as the company becomes successful.
Can you share the story? And I saw, I believe you did an interview with somebody else on another show, and you shared the story of how when one of your daughters was very sick and you needed to raise money. Can you just go through that story? And that'll give context to kind of the question that I want to ask afterwards. But I thought it was a very, very powerful and interesting story about what you did and how you did it.
Sure. So this, for those who may not be familiar, this is about my daughter Aisha, who, as I mentioned, passed away in 2015 when she was 18. Now, when she was born with an immune deficiency. I was living in India, and she needed a bone marrow transplant, and that operation could happen only in the UK. And the cost was about £150,000. I was living in India. I didn't have, I didn't have that money at all. But I was determined as a father, as any father would, that I have enough money to buy a ticket, and I'm going to go and take my daughter there, and I'm going to save her. I had no idea how I would do that. I had no money. I didn't have people that I knew there who would help me. So I go there, and then once I land in London, I realized that we're running against a time clock, and we had only a few weeks to collect the money. Otherwise, she would not survive. And I did a bunch of different things, but finally had a radio appeal on an Asian radio, interestingly. Now, because my daughter's name was Aisha, it's funny, but that Aisha name spoke to religions of all kinds. Christians thought she was Christian, Hindus thought Aisha was a Hindu name, Muslims thought she was a Muslim girl, and Sri Lankans thought she was Sinhalese. It was a name that was sort of international, and she belonged to everybody. And that story resonated with everyone. And then suddenly we had, a room that was filled with envelopes and donations, and we collected in excess of £200,000, and we had to then go back on air and ask people to stop sending checks because we just didn't have the ability to process it. I was so deeply humbled, in that moment, because of just the generosity of people who were contributing to somebody who was not even from their country, who they didn't know, they had no connection with. And that's when those moments like that, you feel like, truly humbled, and how important it is to have that deep sense of compassion. And even in tough times, to have a sense of gratitude for people being willing to help you when things seem to be so difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, even before that, right? I read that you would go like door to door. You were calling people. Yeah. You were just doing anything possible.
There's a funny story. I went to the High Commissioner's office in London, and I said, "Give me a rich of all the rich." To the High Commissioner, I said, "All the rich Indians. Give me their names, and I'm going to cold call them." So I started picking up the phone and calling them and giving them the story and saying, "I need money. I need to save my daughter's life." And interestingly, they, sometimes I think when your intent is sincere, people can hear it. And they said, "Well, as long as you can confirm the story," they were pledging money, but it was going too slowly. Yeah, you're right. I did. And I think any father would be, in my situation, so desperate that you would do anything to save the life of your child, and which is what I was trying to do.
So the reason why I wanted you to share that story and kind of the background is because one of the messages that you deliver quite strongly, I think, is to not see yourself as a victim. When you grew up, did you grow up in a kind of a middle-class environment, or would you say it was more middle class?
Middle class. Yeah, my dad was in the government service. My mom was a doctor, but like a loving family, but very much middle class.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this message of not seeing yourself as a victim, you've obviously gone through some terrible tragedies. You've kind of made a life for yourself in a career, coming here from India, becoming the CEO of one of the largest companies. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but it seems to me, especially in today's climate that we're in, it seems very easy for people to default to victimhood. And it's hard to pinpoint why that's happening and what the root cause of that is. But it seems to me that at least more people today are trying or feel like they are victims of something. And there's not enough ownership being taken on behalf of people to take control over their lives, their future, their destiny. I tell the story of my dad frequently on this show as well. And I have parents who immigrated from Georgia, the former USSR, and they had no money, they didn't speak the language, they had no documents, and they ended up coming, to the United States. And they lived in poverty pretty much in the Republic of Georgia. My dad lived in low-income housing in Philadelphia before he was able to get a job. And even they were able to build and create something for himself. And to this day, my dad doesn't even want to talk about his past. He doesn't want to burden people with his problems. He doesn't believe in victim. Like, you create your own path and build it. And it almost feels like that's not a message that we hear enough of in today's world. And a lot of people are, view themselves as victims for why they are not able to get to where they want to be or why they're not able to get what they want. And so I love your message of kind of empowerment and not seeing yourself as a victim. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important in today's world? And are you seeing that as a problem inside of, or maybe not even inside of organizations, just in our lives, just kind of the victimhood mentality?
Yeah, well, I think, we all from time to time get overwhelmed by what's happening to us.
Yeah.
And then we are seeking a way out of it. And it's quite understandable that the pressures may be so immense that we're just so sort of, lost that we can't find a way out. And we keep spinning in what the issues are. And interestingly, the only way out is by focusing on what you can control and not get lost in the narrative of what's happening to you. And if people, I would argue, and if the listeners were, I'm sure they do it in many aspects of their lives, but if they realize that, whenever things are very tough and I step back and say, okay, this is difficult, but what can I do? What is it that I control? And can I just have a maniacal focus on just that? Because that's the only thing that I can influence. If they do that, you have a strange sense of calm and of being empowered and of being in charge. And ironically, you can influence the things that are outside your control by actually ignoring them and focusing on what you have control over. Because when you focus on what you have control over, you expand your influence over things that you don't have control over. So and I think in my case, I have to be honest, I kind of stumbled into it, and some of it was just the necessity of what I was going through. So I lost 2 of my daughters. And in both of those situations, I felt the intense pain of not being financially independent. It was so desperate. And I felt like such a failure, not being able to provide for my children and for their well-being, that I resolved in my mind that I have to do much better with my career and what I can control and be the very best version of myself. So that was kind of a big trigger for me to get really focused. But then on, I learned from my daughter. Think about this. So Aisha was 13. She was told she was going to die in 5 years. And she knew she had only 5 years to live. But, she lived her life focusing on the time that she had, as opposed to thinking about what she did not have and everything that was taken away from her. And in those 5 years, she achieved, she became a best-selling author of a book. She's a motivational speaker, and she had this innate ability to just focus on the here and the now and the today and the present and make it magical and make it meaningful and have gratitude for that. And I think I saw her firsthand, and that has truly inspired me because I saw the impact and the joy of it, and therefore it's kind of shaped me. So it's not that I never, go into this realm of worrying about what might happen. Of course I do, but then I catch myself and remind myself to focus on what I can do and what I can influence. And every time I've done that, I have felt more empowered, I felt happier, and I've actually ended up influencing the uncontrollable. And therefore it becomes like a winning habit. And I think, therefore, our listeners, I would encourage them to, to try it. And I'm sure that, the people do it in some parts of their lives and not in everything. But I think it is a phenomenal ability once you're able to exercise it and build that muscle.
Do you want to learn how to create an amazing corporate culture while avoiding the pitfalls that make for a toxic one? If so, I created a brand new 8-part training video series just for you. In total, it's around 30 minutes in length, and you can get it right now by going to helpmyculture.com. Go there right now before this training series disappears forever. Again, that is helpmyculture.com, and get access to this free 8-part training series on how to create an amazing corporate culture. And it seems like another part of that is the motivation to actually do something. Because it's one thing to identify what you can control. It's also another thing to have the motivation to go out and do it. And so maybe, and I don't know where a lot of people struggle with. Maybe they struggle with identifying what it is. Maybe they struggle with getting the motivation to actually do it. But where do you think that motivation comes from? So it could be, maybe you're an employee at a company and you're not a leader and you want to be, and you say, well, I'm not a leader because, it's a bad culture. My manager doesn't like me. They're not promoting me, or my manager has unrealistic expectations of me. And it's you put a lot of why you are not able to achieve something, and you give somebody else the power for dictating why you're not able to get there. And
yeah, great question.
So maybe you do identify what it is I can control. Well, I can work hard, I can put in more hours, I can do X, Y, Z, but then you also have to do it. And sometimes that motivation, especially if you're working for a manager who you don't feel likes or respects you or appreciates you, it's very hard to do that. And you kind of need the internal motivation. How do you get that? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think great question. So I would take it back to how our character is wired, and I think the source probably lies there as we explore this question. So our behaviors are a function of our thoughts, right? We think and then we do, and our behaviors then become habits. Habits define character. Character unlocks destiny. So character, coming backwards, is habits, behaviors, thoughts. And then what drives thoughts are values. Values are, the roots, almost like the metaphor of a tree that nobody can see. And under the values is your core need of what gives you your sense of identity. Who am I? And I think that core sense of identity of who I am and what I drive my sense of self from, and then values are so important because they shape how you think, how you show up, how you behave, who you are, and what will happen to you. And therefore, for example, if my value and core need is that, I am the master of my universe, and I can unlock whoever I choose to be, and I am responsible for what happens to me, nobody else, right?
Yeah.
If those are your ingrained values and beliefs, then you will show up in that way. And if they're not, then you will not. So therefore, this importance of, nurturing up not only our competence, but also our character. And that goes back to our upbringing, our family, our schools, our community, our spiritual practice, what we read, our friends, our mentors. And, therefore, realizing the importance of that, because that, I think, then deeply impacts and shapes who we are and how we show up and the choices that we make in life.
So you need to have the right values, it sounds like. So maybe the challenge for a lot of people is they have the wrong values that they are leading their lives by.
I would say that probably unknowingly they have embraced self-limiting beliefs, self-limiting values, and they have a core need, which is like, maybe I'm a victim, maybe like life has never been fair to me, and if only other people would do more for me, I would live a better life. And if you embrace those kind of limiting beliefs, then that's what your reality will be. So I think something like this requires, deep work, where you're able to step back. And this is not that this can't be unplugged and changed. I think you can step back and say, okay, if I wanted to take greater ownership in the destiny of my life and the direction of my life, let me examine, why do I behave in this way? Why do I procrastinate? Why do I not take action? Maybe because I'm thinking this. And why do I think this? Well, because maybe my core belief is this. And is that the right core belief? Or, has it lost its relevance? And let me just take that out, throw it out, and let me now basically include a more empowering belief, which is that, like I can control what happens to me, and that I choose to focus on things that I have control over. And I think if you do that and you read and you kind of deepen your appreciation of that, I do think that's how I think transformational change can happen.
Yeah.
I think anything else would be very cosmetic, I think.
What about in situations where you are genuinely in a position where there is an injustice, or where somebody's trying to hold you back, or where you're not able to get to where you want to go because of a process or a system or a person? Like there's legitimately something keeping you from getting ahead. Do you still change your mindset and focus on what you can control, or is it then acceptable to say, well, I'm not able to get there because there's this framework or this person in place that's just keeping me from getting ahead?
I would say even in those situations, and all of us, deal with that, is, there is always this overlap of what's happening to you and what you contribute to. But I would argue my starting point is that I control a lot.
Yeah.
And even how other people are responding to me is a function of how I'm showing up. So therefore, my first default position would be, okay, I'm not getting the end result that I wish. What can I do about it? If the process is broken, if the person is not seeing me the way I ought to be seen, then let me go and have an honest conversation. Let me explore it and let me push this as far as I can, because that's what I can do. But if it comes down to the fact that this is not an organization whose values I respect, or it's not an organization where I feel I belong, then I opt out, because I feel that I have gone to the end of the road in terms of what I could influence. And then this is not the right environment for me. So in that moment, my choice is to make a decision to go elsewhere, But again, you're in control. You're the one who's choosing the path of your life, because I think your life is nothing but a consequence of the decisions that you make.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would do in that situation.
Yeah, it's funny. I interviewed Ray Dalio fairly recently. He wrote the book Principles, and he created Bridgewater and Associates, and he had a very, very similar message. And I guess you could say in some situations you can look at it as kind of a tough love approach of like, nobody's coming to save you but you, right? There's nobody's going to look out for you but you. And if you view yourself as a victim, you will be a victim. And if you give other people power for why you can't grow and succeed and get to where you want to be, then that's kind of the reality that you're going to live in. So I think that's a very important mindset for a lot of people to have, especially in the corporate world, because you can probably accomplish a lot more than what you think you can do if you get your mindset and your values in the right direction.
Yeah, I think you must be familiar with the Pygmalion effect, right? Which is that what you expect to see is what you end up seeing.
Yeah.
And I think we all know that human beings are flawed. We have filters, we have biases, we have assumptions, we have labels, we have all kinds of stuff going on. The only thing that we have is our perception of reality. And the funny thing is, if we assume that a certain person is treating us a certain way, and we're not conscious that that may not be true, we start responding in a certain way, which will actually make it self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
So I think it is so important, therefore, to constantly check yourself at the door, question your assumptions, and again, show up in a very positive way to ensure that you're getting the outcome that you seek. And if not, then you make a decision accordingly. But I think it's a very powerful way to be, because you always feel that, okay, I am in charge of my life. This is my life, and I will steward it to whatever gives me the most fulfillment and joy.
How important is that fulfillment and joy? Especially, and for some people, they might say, I don't have the luxury of fulfillment and joy. I just need a job that pays the bills. So how do you balance the fulfillment, the joy, the happiness of the work that you do with the fact that you need a paycheck at the end of the day?
So I think it depends from person to person. I can share with you, my sort of take on it is a life. I really believe that all of us want to live a good life. I believe that all of us want to leave a legacy. All of us want to have an impact. And to me, a life well lived is a life that is fulfilled, not in a unidimensional way, but in a multidimensional way. And let me explain. I don't think life is just unidimensional, that it is only about work, that I am who I am because of how I show up at work 8 hours a day and that's it. No, it's a multidimensional wheel of life, almost like a wheel of life, where if you were to imagine that each spoke of that wheel is a role that we play. So I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a colleague, I'm a coach, I'm a student, I'm a sportsman, I'm a musician, I'm a reader, I'm a learner, I'm a spiritual learner, I'm a community servant, etc. So I have these many spokes. And my life will be fulfilled and well lived if I have progression on all of these spokes. And I'm becoming a better father, a better coach, a better student, a better athlete, a better musician. And, something that if we are seeking fulfillment across all these dimensions, we'll have a well-balanced life.
Yeah.
If we don't, then our only self of identity, if it is only work, then guess what? If something happens at work, we're absolutely gone. I mean, it's like life has lost all meaning and purpose, and we have such a disproportionate reaction to it. So I think holding this view that my life is much more than how I show up at work, and my fulfillment in life and journey is about progression, progression. And may not be excellence, I may not ever achieve it, but progression, which is if ever I feel I'm a deficit in a particular area, I take some action. If I feel that I'm not being a good friend, I pick up the phone and call up my friend. That's taking action and drives fulfillment. On the other hand, if I feel I'm being fulfilled, then keep taking action to stay fulfilled.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my take of like what is a fulfilled life. It's more than just how I show up at work and paycheck and all that. That's important. But I think for no matter who you are, you have a multi-dimensional life, and I think that is a richer way to express what life can be than just say a singular one-dimensional aspect.
I love that. So it seems like maybe the first thing that a lot of people can do is to identify what are those spokes for you.
Yeah.
And do you do this as kind of like check-ins with yourself? Like how do you actually pay attention to because it's one thing to write out those spokes, but it seems like another thing is to check in with yourself maybe every week, every month, I don't know, and it just...
Yeah, every month. So I'll share with you my own assessment very honestly. So, on my wheel, I think an area that I'm feeling quite fulfilled right now is a musician. So I play the guitar and I've been playing for a long time. And then even if you're fulfilled, you want to do some things to take it to the next level. So I signed up for a Steve Vai, guitar weekend course.
Oh, wow.
And went there.
He's quite the guitar player there. Good luck with that one.
Yeah, so I rocked out for a couple of days and came back inspired. So that's one example of if it's going well. Interestingly, an area that's not going well or was not going well is, or constantly, work in process is, with my relationship with my wife, because you keep sort of working on it. And so I was not very happy a couple of weeks ago when my wife said, you know what, Niren, you're a human doing. You're always doing something. I want you to be a human being. Just relax, just chill out, just be with me, just present. And initially I was upset by that, I felt judged and all that. But then I really thought about it and spoke to my coach, and he pointed me to this fabulous book called 5 Love Languages.
Oh, yeah, I know that. Yep.
And I read that, and it just gave me a different window on, hey, it's not good or bad. It's just like, people want to be loved in different ways. And what she's saying is, hey, I love you, and please love me in the way in which I want to be loved, which is, do the chores around the house, and when you're sitting with me, just put the phone away. So those are some examples of, as you're doing regularly a check-in, you're aware of, hey, how am I showing up in the relationships that are so important to me? And how can I be better? And I think it's applicable to all of us. And so I do that periodically, say, once every month I look at it and I do a mental checklist of, okay, where am I feeling good and where am I not feeling good versus what's important to me. And if I'm not feeling good or I'm feeling good, important thing is, what action will I take?
Yeah.
What is that one thing that I will do? However small,
Yeah, the actions are crucial. The last 15 minutes or every show, I like to dive deeper into a particular topic. So before we get into that, which I thought we could look at humility and vulnerability, before we jump into that and look at some of your feedback there and your insights, your advice, your action items for people, let's touch on one more theme, which is what motivates you and drives you today, because you're the CEO of a large organization. A lot of people might say, well, you've accomplished everything there is to accomplish. What motivates you still to do better, to lead better, to learn new things, to just be a better human being?
I like to think of myself as work in progress. I think of life like, like an unfinished painting. And you envision that painting and you wake up every day trying to make that painting a bit better. And I think for me, the construct of how I want to show up is like I shared with you, that wheel of life, life well lived is a life fulfilled. However, I think my purpose is to inspire myself and those around me to be the best versions of ourselves in everything that we do every single day. I want to not only do it myself, I want to be a catalyst to do that with other people. And be it my son, who's an incredible musician, be it my wife, be it at work, or in any dimension of life. That's what really drives me. And I think, finally, any situation where I feel I can learn and have an impact is what really motivates me. That I can make a difference and I can learn, and I've learned something new. I think that's what motivates me.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, let's use our last few minutes together to talk about something that I know you're very passionate about, which is humility, and we can touch on vulnerability as well. So why is humility an important aspect for you as a leader? How do you practice humility? Do you have any stories or examples that come to mind for you? Thanks again for tuning into today's show. Remember to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts. It's less than 16 cents a day. And when you subscribe, you're going to get access to a bonus episode right now with Niren, where he talks about what it means to lead with humility and vulnerability and how to lead with your heart. You'll also hear a personal story from me, a vulnerable story that Niren asks me about. And I do share it somewhat reluctantly, but if you want to find out what it is, you got to be a subscriber to the show on Apple. When you subscribe, you also get access to a weekly bonus episode from one of my amazing guests like Niren. You also get early access to new episodes and ad-free listening. Again, it's just less than 16 cents a day. What could you possibly be waiting for? I hope you decide to subscribe and support the show. I'll see you next week.